maybe we should get started now. And glad to welcome everyone here. I'm Bill McPherson. I'm at Unitarian Church in Seattle, also a member of the board of the UU Ministry for Earth. And I like to start each meeting with a little challenge. So I'm going to give you some opportunities to see some acronyms. I start out with acronyms because that's usually a good way to identify things. And if you can spell out those acronyms for me, you get an extra point. Oops, I went too far. Here we go. Anybody know what CFC is? I can't see you, so you'll have to speak up.
Yes.
Unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Chlorofluorinated, well, they're the things that are destroying have affected the ozone layer.
That's right. They're chlorofluorocarbons. That's the full name.
Chlorofluorocarbons.
Chlorofluorocarbons. Now the next one's very similar. Anybody recognize that one?
Hydrofluorocarbons.
Hydrofluorocarbons. When the Montreal Protocol was negotiated, the chemical company said we can replace the chlorofluorocarbons with the hydrofluorocarbons. We'll talk about that later. How about IPCC?
Yeah,
We all know
that.
Okay. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're the ones that discovered that the hydrofluorocarbons are also very high power greenhouse gases, very high power. They're like 30,000 times as strong as carbon dioxide. They're in very small concentrations, so that number sounds very impressive, but it isn't that bad. How about RPS?
Renewable Portfolio Standard.
Right. When we talk about wind power, we talk about renewable portfolio standards because that's what states set as the minimum for renewables at certain dates. How about MW or GW if you like?
Gigawatts or megawatts.
Right. These are the power measurements that are used for renewable power. Okay, you've all mentioned drawdown, and these are the drawdown solutions from the website, drawdown.org, and they're ranked 1 through 7, as you can see here. So refrigerant management is number 1. And Darcy, you're gonna have to help me on this. I'm not sure why we got a minus $902 billion savings on it. You'd think that would be in the cost column, not the savings column, but there it is. And then wind turbines, the net cost, 1.2 trillion, but the savings, 7.5 trillion. So that's a pretty good payoff, you know? So we'll talk about those two entirely during this presentation. We won't talk about reduced food waste or plant-rich diet, forests, educating girls, or family planning. Those are for another time.
Bill, I think it's a negative there because it's going to cost more to transition from refrigerants.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes,
Yeah.
That's probably the reason. Okay, I'll go on now to the international actions that have been taken with regard to chlorofluorocarbons and hydrofluorocarbons. So the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer was ratified and came into effect in 1988. And the objectives are to promote cooperation, research, and activities that affect the ozone layer. In other words, to adopt legislative or administrative measures against these activities. on the ozone layer. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was also created in 1988 to provide policy makers with scientific assessments, assess risks, and put forth adaptation and mitigation options. And they have now made, I believe, 6 reports since 1988. The Montreal Protocol, I'm going to admit somebody just came. Okay. The Montreal Protocol also was negotiated in 1988. It's a protocol to the Vienna Convention, requires parties to reduce CFCs to 0. Developed countries were required to begin phasing out in 1993, and they've since completely phased out. Other countries are also required to phase out, and there will be trade sanctions for any countries that continue to produce CFCs. The Kigali Amendment was agreed in 2016 under the Obama administration. It was very late in the Obama administration, and it never really was taken up by the Trump administration. The Kigali Amendment recognized what the IPCC had found, that is, that the hydrofluorocarbons, which replaced the chlorofluorocarbons, sorry, that's a mouthful, chlorofluorocarbons, are a very high greenhouse gas potential. So that's the summary of the international actions on hydrofluorocarbons. Go back.
Hey, Bill, I'm just gonna
questions. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just gonna throw out that I need to check, but I believe the Senate or a committee of the Senate has just voted to bring it up, the Kigali Amendment, to the Senate to ratify.
Yeah, that's what I'm coming to next.
Oh, okay, sorry. Never mind.
So the US had pretty much ignored the Kigali Amendment until this year. And late last year, there was legislation on the COVID relief package that included a bipartisan climate agreement to phase down HFCs. So it's authorizing the Environmental Protection Agency to begin to implement the Kigali Amendment. Then on January 27th, President Biden directed the administration to prepare to send the Kigali Amendment for phasing down HFCs to the Senate for advice and consent. So it is now before the Senate, as Doris mentioned. I think the Environment Committee has it on their agenda. Is that correct? Doris is currently on the agenda for the Environment Committee.
Okay, and a quick aside, you can create an action in your drawdown list to do actions to contact your senators and encourage them to pass this and get drawdown credit for contacting your elected officials.
You should first find out what your senator's position is. That is, send them an email and ask them to state their position on the Kigali Amendment. It may mean that they have to figure it out themselves. They may not have decided already. So that's a good starting point. Now, many state actions have also taken place with regard to HFCs, particularly in the years from 2016 to 2020 or 2021, because the federal government wasn't doing anything. 4 states, California, Washington, Vermont, New Jersey, all enacted legislation to phase down HFCs. For you policy wonks, they're the bill numbers. Since I work on the Washington State Legislature a lot, I always look at bill numbers and figure out what's going on. But other states have also done things, usually under existing laws or pending bills. So you should find out what your state is doing. I noticed that Iowa is not on this list, for example. Anybody else who's not on this list?
Yes, Michigan's not on the list.
Okay, there you go, Michigan. See what your state is doing.
Ohio.
Ohio's not on the list either. Okay.
South Carolina's not on the list. Surprise,
Okay.
surprise.
Okay, there's a good chance for your state action network to get involved, find out what's going on. It may go on in parallel with what the federal government is doing, and sometimes the federal government can preempt what the state's doing, but doesn't hurt to pursue both at the same time. Any other questions on hydrofluorocarbons? Since my screen is filled with this PowerPoint, I have to check on the time here. 1:32. Okay, we still have a little time before we're going to switch to wind power. Does everybody understand the issue fully now with this very brief review? One question I always get is, what are they going to replace the hydrofluorocarbons with? And there are several refrigerants that are much more benign, but they're still kind of dangerous in their own right. Ammonia, for example, is a rather dangerous chemical. And when the Washington State Legislature was debating the reduction of the hydrofluorocarbons, the refrigerant companies would come and say, we don't have employees who are trained on the safety issues regarding ammonia and other new refrigerants. So that's been an issue all along. And it's kind of like downsizing fossil fuels. You have to retrain the employees in that sector for the new kinds of technologies that are needed. Miriam, question?
Yeah, just quickly, we're talking about refrigerated trucks. We're talking about stores that have refrigeration, homes. What am I missing?
Air conditioners.
Air conditioners.
Even heat pumps do have a refrigerant. You know, heat pumps work both ways. That is, they can act as an air conditioner in the summer and as a furnace or a heater in the winter.
And isn't it true that online storage of stuff is sucking up an enormous amount of air conditioning power to keep the big computers cool? So the more stuff, you know, the internet's great, and, you know, we don't use paper maybe so much and all of this stuff, but it's put a huge load on refrigerants. So
you're probably talking about the server farms, they're called. Server farms are big warehouses, usually with huge racks of computers, server computers.
Many of the big groups like companies like Facebook, Google, Apple have moved their server farms to, a lot of them, to Iowa, where the electricity is really cheap, but they also buy 100% wind energy. But you're so right, those server farms are really energy hogs, and there's no windows. They're just they're like a freezer. They have to keep them so cold to keep them from overheating.
Exactly, and that's where the refrigerants are playing a big role. And I think these tech companies are doing their best to get beyond hydrofluorocarbons. I think they're working on the new refrigerants now.
Bitcoin is a huge part of that, a huge suck on our energy, electrical energy production and growing.
You're talking about the Bitcoin
Digital
mining.
currency.
Yeah, the mining it's called.
Yeah, yeah. And,
The idea that you have to use blockchain technology to find a Bitcoin or to get a Bitcoin, yeah. Man, you had a question? Go ahead, man.
Hi, 3 years ago, I bought a, at the big box hardware store a refrigerator that uses propane as the refrigerant, and it's put it in a rent house, and it's been working just fine. And they're experimenting with a different refrigerant for window units. Anyway,
propane is one of the replacement refrigerants that's being used. And again, the refrigerant companies will say, we have to have safety measures in place because that's obviously very flammable. One reason that the CFCs were introduced and became so popular back in the 1930s is they're not flammable. And that was also true of the HFCs. So we're kind of going back around the circle back to the 30s with the refrigerants we're now introducing. Maybe someone will come back with a better alternative in the future that's neither flammable nor a high greenhouse gas potential gas.
Just wanted to say today, I concluded purchasing replacement air conditioner after researching split ductless alternative coolant that is R32, which you can get in Europe and Japan, but you cannot get in the US. And those, to try to do those systems, as opposed to purchasing, say, a 16 SEER, that is seasonal energy efficiency rating, is $10,000 to $12,000 more. And because I'm 68 and you know, the day will come I can't do the stairs in my 30-year-old house, it doesn't make sense to put it in here. But drawdowns, emphasis on the which coolant you use, how efficient the system is, and you know, do you have a refrigerator that's the size you need or too big for you, or a freezer that's too big, or and these work in conjunction with furnaces. You can bring down all of your greenhouse gas emissions more that way. And I did succeed in getting 3 businesses in Chicago that are selling air conditioners to realize that there is a niche audience who wants far better, far more efficient, less greenhouse gas. And when I showed the screenshot of the circle from drawdown, the pie chart, he was surprised.
Okay, if there aren't any more,
well,
Doris, go ahead.
Well, I have a little bit to offer if there aren't any more questions before we transition to wind.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna share screen. Because people asked how can they learn more, and so there's a few ways. I've put in the chat a link to one of the fact sheets for drawdown Eco Challenge refrigerant, where to get that Eco Challenge fact sheet. What I'm showing you is if you go into the industry category, there's several actions related to refrigerants. Right now, if you select this, you will get credit in your Eco Challenge drawdown for learning about the impact of refrigerants. And on any of these that are circled here related to refrigerants, there's a Learn More button. And when you click on that Learn More button, it brings you to a couple more links where it'll take you to a video, it'll take you to another fact sheet, it'll take you to webinars, different places where you can learn more. And I mentioned contacting your senators regarding the Kigali Amendment Bill followed up on that. One thing that I just want to mention about refrigerants, and this I just pulled off of Wikipedia about greenhouse warming potential relative to carbon of these different gases. You can see like the global warming potential over a 20-year, 100-year, and 500-year lifespan. How much more if we just look at HCFC 22, which I believe is one of them that we're talking about. Is that right, Bill? Do you know for sure?
That's
Okay.
right.
So compared to say carbon dioxide, it's 5,280 times greater over a 20-year period, and you can see the multiplier of some of these gases. And Bill showed you this list that came out of an earlier version of Drawdown. And lastly, this is a version of the EPA regulation that was on the books and that some states are adopting, but I'm sure there's updated versions to it. So it's referred to as Section 608. So just a few things to know about if you go down this path of trying to tackle one of the number one or very, very high on the list of contributors to global warming. So for the people who wanted to do more, learn more, go into your eco challenge and you will find things. And passing it on to Mike, our guest. Back to Bill and on to Mike.
Yeah, I just want to say Doris is really good at the details. When you look for details on things, you can go to Doris or go to the website where you'll find a lot of things that Doris has put into the website that are really useful. So please go to the drawdown part of the UUMFE website. Do you all know how to get there? You can just put drawdown in the search box that first comes up when you first go on the website, and you'll have the full range of things that are available on drawdown.
And I just wanted to say that there's one item that you can check for the drawdown. It's under industry and it's called Sell Me Your Climate Bombs. And it's a podcast and it's just fascinating.
Climate bomb. Now there's a good phrase for HFCs. There we go. So this is the energy picture for the US in 2019. The latest data I could find. It's probably a little lower for 2020. So it's 100 quadrillion BTUs. And down in the lower right corner, you'll see 10,000 BTUs is 3 kilowatt hours. If you want to make that translation. So as you can see, the big parts of the energy picture are petroleum and gas, each about a third. Petroleum a little more than a third, most of that for transportation. Nuclear power 8% and coal 11%, and that is shrinking. That's probably less this year than 2019. And if you look at the slice of the pizza there, that's renewable energy. It's 11%, which is not that much. It's about 3,000 gigawatt hours. And of that, wind is the largest single component, although not by much, 24% versus 22 for hydroelectric, 20 for biofuels, and 20 for wood. So biomass altogether is actually 43%. Those are the main things we are looking at, especially hydroelectric, wind, solar and geothermal, not so much the biomass. We're looking at to replace petroleum and gas, and especially coal. So that's where we need to go. And in my opinion, from what I've read, I would say that wind is the most scalable of the renewable resources. There was an article today in the Seattle Times about the resistance of landowners to the large-scale solar farms that are being developed in the state of Washington. Eastern Washington is sunny, has a lot of dryland farming. It's not desert, but a lot of farming using irrigation from the big dams we have. And people don't really want to replace good farmland with solar farms. Wind power is a different matter. Wind power can be compatible with farming. It takes a small footprint, and then crops can be planted right around the wind turbine. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted to see you to see the mix we have here of different power sources. I have to click back in my, there we go. So we're going to talk about renewable portfolio standards. And if you look across this list here, and I'm going to put in the chat a link to a full table with all of these things. Look for your state and see if it has a renewable portfolio standard. For example, Washington, which I put at the top, has a standard that started in 2012, and we're supposed to be 15% below 1990 levels this year, just last year, end of last year, 25% by 2035, and 100% by 2045. And that's one of the more ambitious renewable portfolio standards. Now, this applies to electricity, not to the other forms of energy like petroleum. You'll see a few more states in the mix that have 100% reductions. For example, California, well, or Arizona, California, District of Columbia, Hawaii, and Hawaii is doing very well with solar. Maine, I don't see another one right offhand. Oh, New Mexico by 2045. New York by 2040, which is pretty ambitious. Puerto Rico, 100% by 2050. Rhode Island, 100% by 2030. Some of the states only use megawatt standards. So that's Texas with 10,000 megawatts and Iowa, 105 megawatts. So I'm going to ask the Iowans here to talk about their megawatts there. Now, is there a national renewable portfolio standard? Does anybody want to venture a guess?
You're making us laugh now, Bill.
Okay. No, there isn't. Why not? Gary, you can talk. Tell us why not.
Well, we've only recently, and thanks to Bernie Sanders, recognized that we have a problem. Admitted that we have a problem.
Yeah, the first step is
It's
saying,
political.
yeah, first step in solving a problem is knowing you have the problem, right? Okay, so President Biden has made a proposal, and this was about 2 weeks ago. It's just a little dated. The creation of a national standard requiring utilities to use a specific amount of solar, wind, and other renewable energy. So it's pretty vague, but nevertheless, that is a step toward a renewable portfolio standard for the entire country. Now let's switch to wind. And as of January 2019, There were 58,000 wind turbines in the US. Most have been, or all have been constructed since 1980. And there are 1,500 wind farms, you can call them, 43 states and Puerto Rico. Each wind turbine can produce 1.5 megawatts of electricity. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I will be putting in the chat a list of the states that had the renewable portfolio standards and some detail about them. And I'd like to turn it over to Mike at this point. If you can take it from here, Mike, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Bill, and it's great to be here with some fellow UUs. I want to just go back to talking about that RPS screen that you were talking about, and you were kind of mixing it up a little bit about talking about carbon reduction. RPSs are only about percentage of renewable energy that a certain state gives. You were talking about, so when most of the states started out with, they like round numbers, they like alliteration. 25 by 25. That was 25% renewable energy by 2025. And that's what a lot of states have. But let me tell you a little bit about Iowa wind. I introduced myself before. I've been doing wind in Iowa for almost 20 years. It's about the time that wind really started to take off. We're number one in the percentage of electricity that we produce. We're over 59%. We've been number one in that percentage for probably 15 years. We're number two in total installed wind capacity behind Texas. We produce 34 billion kilowatt hours a year in wind energy in 2020. That's 11,666 megawatts of installed capacity. We have almost 5,600 wind turbines, those large ones that you were talking about that average 1.5 megawatts. Most of those are actually 2 and over. There's some older ones that are now 25% of our turbines that have been installed have actually been repowered with longer blades and new nacelles, which is actually the turbine portion that's on top of the tower that the blades hook onto. Those have been repowered. So 25% of our wind turbines are now more powerful than they were before. Now, this all started in 1983 with the nation's first RPS, also called RES, Renewable Electricity Standard, and that was 105 megawatts. And that started the wind industry really in Iowa and across the country because we were the first state to have it, but it was not popular to begin with, and our largest investor-owned utility, Mid-American Energy, sued to stop it from happening. And so it did not actually take place and go into effect till 1988, 5 years after it was passed. What has really made wind take off is actually federal support and state support. It's legislation at the state and federal levels. And what this was production tax credit. In the federal, there was a 2.2 cent kilowatt hours tax credit for wind energy, and the state of Iowa then put in a 1 cent kilowatt hour tax credit, and that totals 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour. And Warren Buffett, who is the largest owner of utility wind in the country with Mid-American Energy and all his other energy companies, said that he did not get into wind because of that he's no tree hugger. It has nothing to do with climate change. It was all based on economics. And I'm here to tell you that even though I have been a climate fighter for 20 years, Iowa wind had nothing to do with with climate change or global warming. It all had to do with economic development and jobs. The father of the American wind industry is an Iowa senator named Chuck Grassley, who I hate with almost every bone in my body. But he understood that Iowa would be a really great place to develop wind. And that's why he was actually the one that wrote the federal production tax credit bill. And so in the state of Iowa, and I've done 20 years of lobbying, wind and renewable energy, for the most part, has received bipartisan support at our state capitol, because we don't talk about global warming, climate change, or drawdown, unfortunately. It's all a framing issue. It has always been about economic development and jobs. Let me just tell you a little bit about that. There's 53 companies in Iowa that produce parts for in the wind supply chain. We've created over 10,000 jobs in the state of Iowa in the wind industry. We've created 19 billion capital investment. On an annual basis, there's almost $80 million of lease payments that go to farmers and over $60 million of property taxes paid to the counties. And especially those are rural counties in Iowa that have a decreasing population, but they still have the same amount of roads and bridges and other infrastructure to take care of. So the tax payments from the wind farms in Iowa has really made a huge difference. I talked earlier about Google and Apple and Facebook moving data farms here. In 2005, we only had 80 megawatts of wind in Iowa. Now there's 11,000 megawatts, I'm sorry. So the very first RPS standard was great, but what it actually has happened, because we were the first and it was so small. Remember back to Bill's slide, 105 megawatts by 1999. Well, they passed 105 megawatts within like the first year or two. And what that allowed them to do then is to sell that power out of state to local states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois that have a higher RPS. Remember we talked about 25 by 25? But those states, it doesn't require that that renewable energy be produced in the state of Illinois or Wisconsin or Minnesota. So they've been able to buy the wind from the state of Iowa. Now, unfortunately, as a climate advocate, it really disappoints me because it allows Mid-American to keep 5 coal plants open when they say they are producing 80% renewable energy now. Well, what that really means is that their load is 100 and they're producing 80 with renewable energy. So they say we have 80% renewable energy now. Well, in fact, a lot of those 100 over here, the people are actually getting their electricity from coal and gas plants while Mid-American sells that renewable energy out onto the grid. And then they get what's called renewable energy credits or green tags, RECs. So it's kind of a little bit of a bait and switch. So the Iowa wind story is good, but if you dig down just a little bit, you'll find some real ugliness there. And that ugliness is the continued burning of fossil fuels to leave us with that climate change, coal and gas, and also the mercury and SOx and NOx and all the other things that coal plants will give you. What else did I want to talk about? The future of Iowa, we're almost to the point where we can't build any more wind farms because we lack transmission. And transmission, just like wind, has now had a lot of small groups that are starting to oppose new wind farms and also new transmission. Well, it's kind of funny that all of those small groups that are usually county-based that prop up in Iowa and maybe all over the wind belt, which is also the corn belt in the Great Plains, they all use the same playbook, and they use a lot of junk science, and also they're mostly funded by the Koch brothers. So they talk about property rights, and they talk about wind flicker effect. They talk about bats and birds, all sorts of other things. It's all a canard. They're really just fronting for the fossil fuel industry, which wants to put the wind and the solar business out of business. So that's a very interesting thing. But one of the greatest solutions to this transmission problem, and Bill had sent it, I couldn't believe that you guys are working on solutionary rail as well. And solutionary rail, you know, if you've studied transportation at all, you realize that, you know, trains are much more efficient at moving people and on freight, yet they use fossil fuels. And so if we could make an electric railroad system in America, we would draw down, you know, we would get to our goals a lot faster. And it also happens to be that there are a lot of railroad corridors or railroad right-of-ways. And what you could do is you electrify the trains and you have overhead electrical apparatus that those trains run on. And I can't think of what those things are called right now. But if you've ever been in a town that has electric buses, A lot of times they have overhead wires that they get the electricity from.
Catenary. It's called catenary.
Catenary. Okay, thank you, Bill. But also there's a huge right-of-way of land that goes through a railroad corridor. And that's a perfect place to put high density, high voltage transmission. Now you can put that in the air on towers, or you can bury that. And those right-of-ways already exist. So you don't have to fight local landowners on transmission. So that's a real opportunity for the expansion of, this is onshore wind. I just want to make one comment about offshore wind. The United States has been very slow to adopt offshore wind. A lot of it had to do with Democrats in the upper, like in Massachusetts, off of, or the Kennedys, all sorts of stuff. They didn't want to see wind turbines out in their viewscape. And, you know, when you actually look at offshore wind, most of it is so far out that the wind turbines look like little toothpicks. And even though they can be 500 yards tall, you know, they are, it is something that we need to do. Offshore wind, Europe is 20 years ahead of us in this, but 75% of Americans' population lives within 100 miles of a shoreline that could be served by offshore wind. And that includes the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf, and also the Great Lakes. And most of those offshore winds are at least 5 miles out to offshore. So you just need to run the high speed or high density cables underwater and get them to shore. And that's, your load centers are very close to those offshore wind farms. So I think that with the Biden administration and their focus on climate is incorporated into everything, and so is infrastructure. And infrastructure in this country means wind, it means solar, it means transmission, and it means jobs, and it means good paying jobs. The two fastest growing jobs in America are wind turbine technician and solar panel installer. I just want to, I've been spending a lot of time on solar these days because solar is actually so much more cost efficient now than wind, partially because it doesn't have any moving parts. But the price, you know, price of solar has come down 90% in 10 years. So even without state and federal incentives, solar is one of the cheapest things, energies out there. But the cheapest energy out there is large onshore wind. It just can't be beat for price. And if you're trying to get more of it and you're working with the other side of the aisle, you know, I'm a Bernie Sanders guy, but to get more renewable energy, sometimes you need to focus not on the environmental benefits of wind and solar. Those will be kind of silent if you're talking to a Republican, but you talk about job creation and economic development. So, and storage is another great opportunity, which what I've always talked about storage with renewable energy is the holy grail, because everybody knows that the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. But if you can overproduce when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining and store that energy, and there's many types of storage, including pump storage, electric storage, compressed air storage, and we're spending a lot more time and research dollars on that now. And storage is actually getting very cost competitive. So, you know, another thing I would recommend is people take a look at Mark Jacobson's work from the University of, or Stanford University, where he has a game plan on how every state in the union could get to 100% renewable energy by 2030. So that's kind of my story about Iowa wind. And, you know, what I just recommend is really, it's policy, and our real opportunity right now is federal policy with the Biden administration. In the next 4 years, we need to make up for the last 4 years and for the last 40 years of climate inaction. Thank you, Bill. And I'm glad to take any questions. There's a question in the chat about birds. Originally, when I lived in California, when I graduated from college in '83, when they first started doing the wind farms out in California, they made a lot of mistakes. Instead of monopoles, which they use now, which is just one solid pole for the whole turbine, lattice towers. And birds like to perch on lattice towers and nest, and then they would take off and they take off into the wind. Well, wind turbines also face into the wind. And initially there were a lot of bird kills and a lot of like California condors and stuff. And they also sited wind farms incorrectly. They put them in migratory bird flyways. And so the wind industry has gotten a lot better in the last 40 years about siting, about the type of construction. The American, Audubon Society encourages wind farms. Wind turbines are like the 8th largest killer of birds. And the #1 killer is climate change. Cats are like in the top 5. Cats that get outside kill just amazing amount of birds. Birds fly into buildings all the time, but wind turbines are not even, and the #1 killer is climate change. Cats are like in the sides also is like in the top 2 or 3. So we have, if we had all organic agriculture, which is how I make my living now in organic and regenerative agriculture, we would kill a lot less birds than trying to ban wind farms. Any other questions?
That was a good point. The other aspect of that is those giant communication towers.
Yes.
Because of the way they're built and the heights they get to,
yes,
kill a lot of birds. So do lights in buildings.
Yeah.
Lit buildings. If we shielded our buildings, we'd save a lot of birds as well. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome, Gary.
Miriam has a question.
These are some things that have occurred to me or I've heard from other people about wind turbines. They talk about the environmental cost of what it takes to construct them, and the fact that that's so high, that both carbon and mining and so forth. That's one thing. And the lifespan of the turbines is not near as long as solar panels. So they get built and then they get abandoned. And for example, I was in the mountains in Southern California when we were doing our climate march in 2014, and we went across a huge mountaintop with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wind turbines dead, done, gone. They were no more, and there they sit. So how do we solve that, and what's the reality here? Because I don't know.
Well, let me, great questions, Miriam. And the construction cost, here's how I look at that. Once you build the infrastructure for solar or wind, then the fuel is free forever. And when you look at the carbon reduction of a wind farm, and you include the construction costs and the environmental footprint, it's paid back in just a couple years.
Okay.
So the energy that it took to build the tower, the nacelle, and the blades, you're getting even in 2 or 3 years on the energy footprint. And wind turbines last usually about 25 years. What we have to see though is people in the contracts where you have to have disposal and removal of a wind farm in the contract when you sign it. And so a lease owner, you say, okay, in 25 years, what are you going to do? Are you going to put a new one in? And like I said, 25% of the Iowa turbines have been repowered, which is going to extend their lives probably for another 25 years. In the solar industry, one thing is there's no moving parts. So it's all solid state. They last longer. And the warranties are 25 years. So most solar lasts longer than 25 years because your warranty is, if it's 25 years, you get a brand new solar array for nothing if it goes bad. One thing I want to talk about land use. I'm actively doing a lot of consulting for a solar project here in Iowa City, just south, that would be the largest solar farm in the state of Iowa at this point by about 3 times. But people says, oh, it's good farmland. Well, let me tell you what farmers in the business of making a living. Let me tell you one thing. We pay farmers $800 to $1,000 an acre to lease their land. Land leases for farming, if you're going to farm that, are less than half of that. It's usually $300 to $400 an acre or less. So you're paying a farmer 2 to 3 times per acre per year to do that. And let me tell you what you can do with an acre of good Iowa farmland. If you put it into corn and took all of that corn and turned it into ethanol, and you drove a car that ran on ethanol and got 40 miles a gallon, that 1 acre of corn in 1 year would drive that car about 12,000 miles. You take that 1 acre of land and you put solar panels on it, the solar panels, and then you drive an electric vehicle. The solar from that 1 acre could drive 1.2 million miles of electric vehicle. So 12,000 miles for ethanol and corn, and 1.2 million miles using solar panels and driving an EV. That is just mind-boggling in scale. And we need to convert to 100% renewable energy economy. I'm embarrassed that I bought a house 20 years ago from a guy that worked for Mid-American on the gas side. So everything in my house that can't be natural gas is. So every time, like my furnace went out, I replaced it with an electric furnace. But I'm, once my gas range goes out, I'll probably have to get an electric range. And I know a lot of people don't like electric ranges, but I think that we need to stop burning natural gas because everybody knows about fracking. So other questions? Those were great questions, Miriam. I hope I did justice to them.
This is
I want to thank you for plugging Solutionary Rail, and you'll learn more about that in a couple of weeks when Bill Moyer and I, whose team came up with the concept, will be presenting on that right here at UU Project Drawdown presentation.
Been working with the railroad unions here in Iowa, and some of the guys, a former elected official named Jeff Kurtz, who ran the railroad union here in Iowa and was the only statewide elected official to endorse Bernie Sanders last cycle, which means that's about all you need to know. But he got unelected, but he is working on Solutionary Rail, and he just introduced it to me about a month ago. And so I'm so excited to learn more about Solutionary Rail because, and then some of the other issues of replacing fossil fuels are shipping and airplanes. And, we just can't buy carbon credits and carbon offsets to do that because it allows the pollution to still happen. And this is why I hate carbon markets. Carbon markets is a really bad idea, especially in our ag industry and everything else, because it allows people to keep polluting. And we just have to stop. My brother's an environmental engineer. He says, Mike, he said, we got to quit burning shit. And he used that word, and I said, can I use the word stuff? And he says, yeah, but it's more effective when you tell people if you're concerned about climate change, quit burning stuff. And that includes anything with the word bio in front of it. And, your pie chart that you used had all that renewable energy that was wood, biomass, and biofuels. Those are all false climate change solutions. We need to get away from them. And nuclear power.
Bravo, bravissimo.
I think I saw Tom's hand up. Tom, did you have a question?
Yes, I saw a program recently talking about turbines.
Yes.
And, one of the things they said was they're
Your sound is going out, Tom.
Yeah, I lost the last part, Tom. We're not hearing you.
Go ahead, start again, Tom.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part.
Your sound went out.
Yeah. Oh, okay. The turbines now can be equipped with radar and perhaps other sensing technologies to detect the approach of birds and shut the turbine down so that there's not going to be any connection with the moving blades.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're killing a lot less birds. And yeah, it's amazing what they can do with the wind turbine and the technology. We saw that in Texas when during this big cold wave that we had here this winter, and a lot of the wind turbines there froze up, and they don't do that in Iowa or Montana or any place else because we have what's called a cold package on them that heats the blades and also heats the nacelle, so they can work down to like 40 below zero. Whereas in Texas, and they recommended 10 years ago that that ERCOT, which is the grid operator in just the state of Texas, that they reinforce their entire electrical infrastructure and natural gas for these type of cold spells, and they didn't do it. And you know, it's so Texas, you know, that we have 4 grids in the United States, and 3 of them are interconnected. The Eastern Interconnect, MISO, which is the Midwest, and then you've got the Western region in all in grids, and they're all interconnected. They're not connected to the Texas one because Texas has to be independent, and you know, wants to be their own country still, I think.
I think we should let them.
Right.
Let them secede, huh, Gary?
Yeah, they're starting to turn blue. You know, we need those good Democrats to get elected down in Texas, which would be.
Yeah, I put a chart in the chat, a link to the chart that shows you just who's responsible for wild bird kills.
Yeah.
And far and away, it's window strikes and free roaming cats.
Yes.
So feral, and if you let your cat outside. I'm a birder, so very sensitive to this issue.
Just want to comment and kind of wrap up my little presentation on wind and climate and drawdown. You know, I look at myself as in the education business, okay? I've educated myself, and you all here today, I'm very thankful you're educating yourself on refrigerants and on wind. Now, that's just the first part of it, is educating yourself. The second part is to educate your family, your friends, and your coworkers about what you've learned here today. But the most important re-education piece is our elected officials at our local, our state, and our federal level. And when you get down to it, individual action is great, but what really moves the needle on climate change is massive action at the federal and state level. Those policies, like the RPSs and like some of these other things and all these other bills on the CFCs. Hydrofluorocarbons is hard to say sometimes. The chlorofluorocarbon is also hard to say.
I don't feel so bad now.
But so, you know, it's that sort of action, and anything in this challenge that involves contacting elected officials, to me, those are the ones you should be doing first. And I want to take the thing that I've used for a while, and my good friend Miriam and all the other 100 granny for a livable future from Iowa City, they on their t-shirts have 3 words: educate, advocate, and agitate. And that's what we all need to do, those 3 things. And if we're not doing those on a daily basis, we're not doing our job.
That's a very good point. And you have state action networks to support you. UUs have state action networks in 23 states. And I think all those states are represented here today.
And you have UUs strengthening local climate commitments, helping your local governments to create climate plans that strengthen and accelerate our climate commitments. And we have a new thing to do, and that is, instead of asking our mayors, how are you going to get to 25% carbon reductions? 25% carbon reductions by the year 2025. The new question is, how are you going to get to 50% carbon reductions by the year 2030? And show me the plan. And Gary is holding up a sign that I can't read.
Fossil fuel free.
ASAP.
I'll explain. This was originally a bumper sticker meme I came up with about 12 years ago. And I also made I felt bad about bumper stickers because they go on cars. So I made some for as bookmarks as well.
Doris, let me talk just 1 second about some of these carbon reduction plans at cities and counties. And a lot of them now have 100% renewable energy by whatever. But what's key in the city of Des Moines was the first in the country to do 100% clean energy 24/7. And what that means is that all of their electricity, all of the time, has to be from renewable energy sources. And in Iowa, I talked about those 5 coal plants that Mid-American has. That means that none of that electricity could be going to the city of Des Moines. So carbon action plans are wonderful, but the devil is in the details sometimes. So take a look at these plans. And so far, the best one I've seen is Des Moines, Iowa, 100% renewable energy 24/7.
And keep after the elected officials. Don't stop when they come up with a plan and say, okay, it's done.
Well, and it's
you gotta monitor. You gotta monitor.
Exactly. And
Action.
you know, like
Action.
getting that 24/7 renewable is great, but we are Unitarians. We care about social justice. And so making sure that justice and equity are included in that plan is very important. And it's one of the goals of SLIC, which is strengthen local climate commitments. And I lost what I was going to say. Oh yeah, Rhode Island, Providence, Rhode Island has an excellent example of building strategic targets into their climate justice plan. Okay, you can go
on the General Assembly website for 2020, where there's a workshop on Rhode Island, on Providence, and how they've built equity into their climate plan. Doris and I were involved in that, so
yeah,
I'm patting myself on the back a little here.
Well,
okay.
So if you click skip for now, now it's taking you to these categories.
Okay.
So we'll get you signed up and give you credit for the session we just had. So if you go down to the box that's industry, there you go.
Okay.
And then scroll down to the box that says learn about refrigerant management. There you go. Let's see a little further.
Here, of old refrigerants, that's not.
Yeah, there's all kinds of refrigerant management choices. Okay, here we go. Research the climate impact of refrigerants. So that's what we did today. So you can click, go down a little bit lower.
Do we need a goal in there already?
No, below learn more, you can hit select.
Okay.
Okay, so you're selecting it and it's saying, how many minutes are you going to spend learning more? So
about an hour we spent, didn't we?
Sure, 60 is good.
Learning, okay.
Yeah, and you can hit add. Okay, so you've selected it.
Okay, so then if we go back and review or see the different videos and stuff, we'd put that in there. Yeah.
Yeah, you can add more, but you've already completed this. So if you click on your dashboard.
Okay, up there.
It gives you this chance to see some learning videos how to use Drawdown Eco Challenge.
Okay.
But you should be able to skip those.
Okay. Wait a minute. So this is where you keep getting invited.
Yeah, just see that X. See that X. Yeah, go up and there's an X. Just click
there.
That. Yeah, click that X.
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
But so if we get a recording of this meeting, we could share it with a couple of people and invite them to join. That would be
Yes.
I mean, I'm inclined to do that sort of stuff all the time.
Yeah, of course. So now on your dashboard, if you go, just scroll, scroll down, it should show you the action that you've already selected today. Keep going, keep going. There you go. There you go.
Okay,
I will
yeah.
learn more. So you have done that. So now you
Okay.
can click the button.
Oh, this here. Okay.
Yep, you can
Right
click
there.
that button.
Okay. Well, I did. What happened here? Oh, it's there, is it?
No, you should, if you click on that space,
Oh,
there you go.
oh,
There you
there.
go.
Okay.
And then you put in your 60 minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought I already did it.
Well, that's when you selected it, saying you were going to do it.
Okay.
Now you've actually done it.
Okay.
And so now your action has just been added, and I'll show you where it was added. If you go to impacts, the impacts button at the top.
Okay. Yeah.
And where it says everyone, you change it to organization. You got to scroll up a little bit.
Oh.
So change that to organization. My organization. Okay. And now you are one of our 235 participants.
Okay.
And if you keep scrolling down a little bit more, it'll say spent so much time learning, more, so many minutes learning. There we go. There we go. There we go. Stop. 11,933 minutes. Oh wait, that's exercising.
No, that's
Sorry.
exercising. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There's another one for learning. There we go. 4,000, just above the pounds of CO2 saved.
Oh, here, up to here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So you have
Okay.
just added 60 minutes to that number.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, some of it. Yeah. Actually, the Immigrant Justice Group has been having us keep a little notebook. We're supposed to report to somebody if we've done an action, and she's. I mean, it's you have to be disciplined enough to do it to make it work. But I've been calling occasionally and doing postcards and different things for democracy and voter activity, you know, in Texas and Florida and Georgia. And one of the groups I do it with is Beto O'Rourke, and it's really fun. There'll be a couple of thousand of us making phone calls, and of course much of it is just futile, just dialing the phone and getting no answer. But at the end of the thing, he will say to us, okay, the 2,000 of you, not everyone stayed on the call the whole time, but we made X million calls tonight. Quite a few of them were hang-ups or no answers, but you know, in the course of that, we have also reached people, you know, and it's very satisfying to see it.
Yeah.
As is my colleague, Doris Marlin. Would you introduce yourself, Doris? Just unmute first. There we go.
Yes. Hello and welcome, everyone. This is a presentation series for our UUs and Elders Climate Action and everybody else who will join us in our Drawdown Eco Challenge. And today we're here to learn more about refrigerant management and wind power in Iowa. And how that fits into the Drawdown Eco Challenge. I am Doris Marlin. I am at All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., also a member of UU Ministry for Earth Board and Green Sanctuary Advisory Board. And we have our chair giving us a thumbs up, who will be the next person to introduce herself, and that is Nancy King-Smith. Nancy, how about if we pass the mic to you?
Just Nancy King-Smith, Chair of the Green Sanctuary Advisory Board and a member of EU Congregation of Cleveland. So let me pass it along to Miriam.
Hi, everybody. I'm Miriam Kasia. I'm about a 45-year UU person. I belong to the Unitarian Universalist Society in Coralville, Iowa. We are proud to have our new church, the greenest church in Iowa, which we moved into, 3 years ago? Is that right, Sally? Yeah. And I'm kind of a full-time activist. I do a lot of stuff.
Okay, Sally, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, well, Miriam already introduced my church, but I want to say that I'm on the board for the Iowa UU Witness and Advocacy Network. And so as that network, we've been presenting on drawdown, and we've done 12 of the 14 churches. So we have 2 more to go if they're willing.
Great, you're really mobilizing Iowa.
And I'm trying to talk Sally and her team into doing something similar on a limited basis for the whole country. So we'll have that conversation later.
Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, thanks. It's good to be here. Mike Carberry. I'm a member of the UU Church out in Coralville, but I still call it the UU in Iowa City. Because that's when I started about 10 years ago. I've been a professional environmental advocate now for 20 years, focusing on climate solutions, fighting false climate solutions like nuclear power and biomass and anything that has the word bio in front of it. I've been on the board of the Iowa Wind Energy Association since 2008, and I'm currently the vice president, and I have my own consulting firm. I'm mostly focused now on 7 of the top 20 drawdown solutions that are related to food and agriculture. That's my jam.
Great.
I'm sorry, and did you say you're with a UU church or
yes,
you are
I'm with the same one with Miriam and Sally.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. And I'm a part-time member of the green team.
Gary, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello.
Hello.
Gary, go ahead. You're on.
All right. Gary Paisan, Coopville, Washington, in the heart of the Salish Sea. Too have been a long time climate activist of about 30 years after reading Bill McKibben's initial book about it. Met Bill and James Hansen a couple of times. Worked with UUs for in their many permutations, including UU Ministry for the Earth, give it up for them. Justice Waugh with Bill, we're on the steering committee. And also I'm president of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network, whose mission is preserving and protecting our native biodiversity.
Thank you, Gary. Tom, can you introduce yourself? Oh, you're busy. That's all right.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with the UU Ann Arbor congregation. I've been with the church for probably about 2 years now. And while I was chair of the Climate Action Group, but now I stepped down from that, and then I've been kind of inactive for about a year, and now getting my feet on the ground again. So I'm happy to join you, and looking forward to getting more information.
We're pleased to have you.
Thank you.
Tamara, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Pam Reynoldsell from Dubuque, Iowa, which is on the Mississippi. And I am also on the board of the Iowa Unitarian Universalist Witness Action Network. But I'm also on the board of the League of Women Voters Upper Mississippi Region Interleague organization, which has 68 local chapters in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois.
Great. Nancy, you've already introduced yourself, I guess. Do you want to say anything more? Okay. Susan, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Susan Robinson. I am speaking to you from Portland, Oregon, and I am involved with the and belong to, or actually have asked to be a member and have had no response, but I belong to the First Unitarian in Portland, but I am actually a resident legally of Columbia, South Carolina, and have been active in that and belong to that Unitarian Universalist congregation of Columbia, South Carolina for, well, I don't know how many years, 25, 30 years, I guess. And I was really attracted to this. I'm active in immigrant justice work, but when we attend our overall broad council meeting, of course, we see the intersectionality of all of these social justice issues and how important it is to work on all of them. And I think climate justice clearly is at the forefront of my concerns, but I came because it's interesting. You can't live in the South very comfortably anymore without air conditioning. And I've been concerned about that. I'm also concerned about going back and forth in airplanes and looking at if high-speed rail or electric car is a reasonable way to go home once a year and come back. I grew up in Portland. My sister lives in Corvallis, but I've come here because my son and his wife have 2 grandchildren and needed my help out here in Portland. But I don't know quite where I belong. I just go back and forth, but I'm troubled about the carbon footprint I'm leaving in all of this activity in life that I'm living.
We need that high-speed electric train for you. Irene, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Irene Kay. I'm in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and a member of the First Unitarian Church of Hamilton. And I'm an animal rights advocate, but I'm broadening my climate horizon and here to learn what I can about refrigerants. Which more, what's happening at our church is that people are involved with environmental issues, but they're all outside of the church. Everybody's doing their own thing on all of these other organizations. So my mission is to try to get something growing within the congregation itself. And I may be barking up the wrong tree, but it's worth a try. Thanks.
Well, keep barking. Karen, would you introduce yourself?
Karen Martin. I'm from North Andover in Massachusetts. Chair of the climate justice group there. Also on the board of UU Mass Action and a nonprofit called HEAT, which is trying to change over our gas. The only other, I'm on the board of a nonprofit called HEAT, which is trying to move Massachusetts off gas for heating and cooking, and well, for heating and cooking, but the heating part would be replaced by a network geothermal system. So that's a big part of what I'm interested in now.
Yeah, that's a good project. Chris, could you introduce yourself? That's Chris Lazarus, please.
Hi, I'm in Portland, Oregon, formerly of New York, and I'm not yet a member of the First Unitarian Church, but I'm on the mailing list, and I saw the notice about this today, and I was real curious. I know nothing about this group and what you guys do, and so I just thought I would, but I'm really concerned. I used to write about the environment, oh my God, 30 years ago. And I know that air conditioning, as far as I know, is more harmful than just about anything else that we do to the environment. I got into environmental things because I'm animal rights. Animals are most important to me, or other life forms. So I just don't know where to start because there are so many issues that are tied in with this. And I'm not sure that individual actions make as much difference as if we could, as a society, move, in lockstep. I used to actually write a lot about high-speed trains in Europe. Don't expect to see a high-speed train across the United States.
No.
Long time. Okay.
No, I don't think so. Chris C., can you introduce yourself? Chris, you're muted.
Okay, yeah.
There you are. Okay.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, I've been talking to Doris for the last few months or so, and I feel I know a lot about the drawdown. So, and I'm from the Sacramento UUSS Church, but I want to make one point today. I always do this. We need to monetize it. And I know all the information we're getting and all the challenges that we're meeting and organizing and all that, that's what we have to do. So I want to take it one step further and actually monetize that. And just quickly what that would mean, something like this. In the Eco Challenge, you do something, right? And you get credits for it, or you trade, or you do something like that, and that helps the environment. Okay, at that very moment, it needs to be monetized. At the very moment you or your group does something that qualifies for the Eco Challenge, then there has to be a benefactor. There has to be an organization that's actually willing to put out cash for what you did, your group did, and then that money, of course, goes into the so-called equity portion of rectifying the wrongs that we've done, not just to the earth, but to the people. And so by monetizing it, it means that it's, in other words, we've completed the capitalist structure of commodity and exchange and all that. And now that essential work, which becomes money, now is returned piece by piece to, well, to the equity campaign. So I'll leave it there. It's monetized. Each success or each effort at this needs to be given a money value. And there's an organization, there are congregations and things out there that will be willing to pay for that.
Okay, why don't you draft a paper on that and send it to me? I put my email in the chat. I'd be very interested in reading that. Sharon, would you introduce yourself? You have to unmute first.
Hi, yes, I'm Sharon DeVos. I'm with First Parish, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm on their Environmental Justice Task Force.
Okay, welcome.
Thank
and
you.
Nan, would you introduce yourself? You'll have to unmute with your phone. I think it's *6 to unmute. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Nan Hildreth. I'm in Houston, Texas, the First Unitarian Church. I've been interested in refrigerants since I read about it in Drawdown, and then dug into it 3 years ago and tried to figure out what to do about it. But I'm tempted to do a refrigerants action project here to go to the local grocery stores, but I want to see what, if y'all have any action ideas on refrigerants.
Okay, we'll be talking about that